back to MSP Culture. So, today we're going to talk about one of my favorite tools from a process perspective, and they're called swim lane diagrams. So, a lot of times when we work in businesses, one of the hardest things to do is be consistent. And pretty regularly, you'll run into issues, especially as your organization's growing, where new people don't really know how to do stuff, or when we train somebody, that telephone game kind of happens where maybe I created a process and I taught one person, and then when they taught it to the next person, a detail was left out, or they forget to explain why something is done a certain way. Swim lane diagrams are one of the more helpful methods of documenting processes that everybody should be following. So, a lot of times people are like, well, why do we need to go into such great detail? People should just know a lot of this stuff. And that's honestly silly. No one knows anything, especially as it relates to your business. Um, they don't know how you should do stuff. So you have to teach people. And over time, people are going to fall into bad habits or we're going to take shortcuts. Having a documented process is a surefire way to be able to correct that stuff. When something goes screwy, you can kind of go back and say, hey, how should have this worked? But even from an efficiency standpoint, if you ever want to figure out why things are taking so long, documenting using swim lane diagrams helps you figure out where all the workflows are, where the handoffs are, and then you can break it down and start trying to measure the results of those different legs of things. And that ultimately lets you be a bit more efficient. So, how do swim lane diagrams work? Now, you can kind of see they're a little bit different depending on how you want to use them, and there's a lot of different ways. One of the more common is to use a role-based swim lane diagram. So something like this, where we're looking at our hardware install project overview, right? This isn't going to be super detailed, but this is going to help us sort of understand at a high level what should be happening and who should be doing stuff. So we can kind of see from left to right, we have the steps, and then going up and down, we have the different roles. And if we zoom out, you can kind of see how the project as a whole will unfold. We also have some markers here where we mark SLAs, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But basically, we can see that things generally start off with our account managers, and they'll receive a request from a client. They'll enter that stuff into Salesforce in our case because we use Salesforce, and that will generate a solution support request, which is how we trigger our architecture team to do some work, and that drops down to our architects. Our architects in our organization are the ones who design solutions, so they're like sales engineers in a lot of organizations. They put stuff together. We go back to the account manager to present the solution, and we see if the customer wants to go ahead and buy it. If they say no because of a technical issue, we bounce it back and we go back to the architects and we say, hey, here's what's going on. If they say no because of a pricing issue, we can go to our product management team to see what's going on. But if they say yes, we mark it as closed one, and that triggers a request into ConnectWise because our operations and delivery teams use ConnectWise. So that drops all the way down here into our engineering groups. And engineers in this case is generic for service delivery. It's not the actual engineers who do the work. I should probably update that field, but it means the operations teams. We create a project in ConnectWise, we assign resources, and obviously this is high level because it just says go do work, right? It's not very specific. Once the work is done, it goes back up to our project management team, and they get sign off from a customer. If the customer does sign off, great. We send it to finance to get invoiced, and we close out the project. So it kind of legs off. If they don't, it bounces back to the engineer to go do more work and finish it up, and we kind of cycle through that process. So this is helpful because you can see how many different times this transfers roles, right? We go from sales to architecture, occasionally to product management. We have to get our project managers involved. We have an engineering group involved. If we broke this down, this would actually probably be a couple more people. There's some service coordinators who are kind of in this project management group. There's sometimes multiple engineers depending on the disciplines that are needed. But all in all, from quote to cash, as we call it, there's one, two, three, four, five, six different departments that kind of have to get engaged here. And that's not trivial, right? So every time one of these lines is crossed, there's potential for error because that's what a handoff would be. And if you think of it kind of like a relay race, right? Like most of the time when that baton gets dropped or something slips, it's during a handoff. It's not usually when the engineer is working on something. They're usually focused on and they're doing work. Like they might fall behind on something and the project manager might have to kind of give them a little nudge. But usually when things slip and they kind of just disappear from our radar, it's in one of these handoffs. So understanding when things are bouncing back and forth like this and all that opportunity for error is super helpful. We can also take it a little bit deeper, right? If we wanted to understand our SLAs based around this stuff, we can zoom out and we can take that's a similar chart to that. This one's broken down a little bit different. You can see dispatches in here. You can see some billing tool sets are broken out in here. You can see we have some humans in here versus machines. And this is how we measure things like how long did it take to assign out a quote to get work done? How long did the design take? Who's responsible in those phases, right? We have this gap in here because it's when it's sitting with the customer and things are getting ordered. So we lose visibility from my perspective because this is built from my view, my purview, not the other teams. And how long does it then take to onboard someone after they sign stuff? So we highlight these so people understand that when we're looking at our metrics, what's covered in it, right? If we have a metric that says, the average duration from quote to onboard or quote signed to onboard is a month, we want to know what that actually means. We don't want them to think, okay, is that from when the design starts, or is that actually post signature, or and who's engaged there? If we want to shrink this number, where do we have to kind of look to make up time? Now, this is a really good way to deal with like human handoffs and interactions and things like that, and it's very user friendly if you build it out. These are pretty straightforward because there's nice clean lines. The processes are, I'm not going to say optimized because we definitely have some room for improvement, but they're definitely better than they could be, and they definitely are better than they have been in the past. We've made an effort to clean up some of these processes, so the lines are pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of back and forth. There's not a lot of redundancy. There are a lot of people, and we can maybe improve on that long term, but it helps us kind of visualize that there's not a whole lot of broken stuff here. We just have to understand all these little cross lines so we know where things could break. Another way to kind of use it is to help track software interactions. And this is one of the things I spend a lot of my time on, right? I do a lot of automation and I like things like that. And that means that we have lots of tools in place. This one kind of outlines a custom implementation we built for a customer who liked using Monday.com as their project management tool set. So, we have Salesforce here, and you can kind of see there's a process that is just in Salesforce. Nothing else really happens. And this was at a time where we had no real integration between the two tool sets. So it represented an inefficiency because there's work being done here on the Salesforce side and then work being done in ConnectWise. Um, when we look at it here, ConnectWise can either have manual entry or receiving things through its email connector. And when that happens, it generates a ticket, and then a bunch of automation kicks off. We used Zapier to do some integrations where we would push data from ConnectWise via Zapier into Monday.com in an external and an internal instance. Both represented different data. You can see that the tools are collecting information, things like pulse IDs, if you're familiar with Monday.com, and then it starts sending updates to the customer so they know what's going on, and that feeds and back into ConnectWise. So the tickets in ConnectWise get updated. You can see that down here we have Bright Gauge. We're a Bright Gauge shop also. You can see that there's feeding miscellaneous gauges there from ConnectWise, and that's kind of the how a pulse gets created from ConnectWise to Monday.com. When things get updated, we add another tool in the mix. There's a tool called Mail Parser that I'm a fan of. It takes emails and turns them into like a database so you can then use that information. Um, Again, when a ticket gets updated, it's feeding Bright Gauge down here, but really it's sending it to the specific email address for Mail Parser, which then consumes the data, and then Zapier goes through and harvests it and pumps it into the different pulses depending on the IDs and things like that. So you can see, based on what's happened, was the status change? Was it updated? If it was closed, do we archive the pulse now so it's not showing up on Monday.com, and so on. So going through things like this, it's useful because you can see all the different interactions between the different tools. If we ever need to troubleshoot something and we say, okay, the external Monday.com board isn't working, we can work through this and try to understand how it's supposed to happen. Like what triggers these things? Where are the pieces? Like where's the workflow that this represents? And it becomes much easier to troubleshoot because we build dozens, if not hundreds, of these workflows, and remembering them all is pretty impossible. So do yourself a favor, and you don't have to start off super complicated like this. Starting off with real simple, straightforward workflows is easy. Keep it high level, see what works, and then add details and add layers as you kind of work through things. And you'll end up in a pretty good position for understanding what needs to happen. You can do multiple tabs. I'm a big fan of having just layers of things in here. So you can kind of see we have overviews, and then we have deep dives into individual sections. You can use color coding. You can do whatever you want to make it a useful document, but start off high level and give yourself the opportunity to understand what's happening, who things are impacting, and where the potential failures in your process are or redundancies are. And it gives you a pretty strong leg up to fix those things. So that's the tip of today. Workflow diagrams or swim lane diagrams. And yeah, have a great day.